My husband, Marcus Thorne, a man who had walked across every continent and mapped forgotten waterways, had only ever issued 2 unbreakable commands in our 30 years together. This second, given just months before he died, was delivered with a chill that contradicted the warmth of his hand in mine. I had honored his request even as the location, a remote, nameless plot in the Yukon territory, gnawed at the core of my archaeologist's curiosity. Marcus, my brilliant, quiet cartographer, was gone now, taken by a sudden aggressive illness that had consumed him in a year. I was a widow at 55, left with a legacy of worn maps, a daughter, Naomi, who was lost in her grief, and the echoing silence of our empty Seattle home. Mr. Lowell, the family solicitor, cleared his throat, pulling me from the desolate landscape of my thoughts. We sat in his dimly lit office, the air heavy with the finality of wills and probate documents. "There is one final asset, Mrs. Thorne," he said, sliding a small, tarnished brass key across the mahogany desk. It was attached to a keyring shaped like a miniature ship's wheel. Beside it was a sealed, heavy canvas envelope addressed in Marcus's distinctive, precise hand. "What is this?" I asked, picking up the heavy, cool key. "A property recorded as the Thorne Claim Parcel 4, located deep in the southern Yukon territory. Your husband purchased it 4 years ago." His instructions were clear. The title was only to be transferred to you after his passing. The property taxes are prepaid for the next decade. The Yukon? Marcus owned nothing but this house and his books. And why keep it secret? It's called the boundary claim. Apparently, it was one of the last places your husband sought to map before his illness. The deed is now fully in your name. However, Mrs. Thorne, you should know that the property has attracted unusual attention recently. Several agents from the Sterling Group have been making aggressive, albeit vague, inquiries. The Sterling Group, a global resource conglomerate known for its ruthless expansion and shady dealings, precisely the kind of entity Marcus despised. My head began to spin with questions. How had he acquired a property in the Yukon? Why the secret? And why was it now attracting corporate vultures? I opened the envelope. Inside, a single sheet of heavy parchment bore Marcus's familiar script. "My dearest Elara, if you are reading this, I failed to beat the clock, and I am so sorry I never told you about my diagnosis. I did not want our last season together to be anything less than full. The claim is yours. I know I forbade you to go, but I am releasing you from that promise. In fact, I am asking you to go just once before you decide its future. Inside the small, windowless shed at the claim center, you will find a secured steel box. The password is the date we met, followed by my favorite constellation. I love you, my stargazer, more than the sum of all the stars." Marcus, I clutched the letter, the pain of his deceit mixing with the raw power of his love. He had been preparing for this ending for a year, all while I was planning our next life chapter. "I need to see this place," I announced, standing up. Mr. Lowell nodded somberly. "I must warn you, the Sterling Group has already filed an initial claim disputing the boundary lines. They are not known for civility." "Then let them come," I said, tucking the ship's wheel key into my pocket. "I know how to read a map, Mr. Lowell, and I know how to defend what's mine." 48 hours later, I stood before a desolate chain-link gate. A hand-painted sign, half covered in snow, read the boundary. This was no sprawling estate. It was a rough, rocky 3-acre triangle nestled between 2 peaks, accessible only by a single rutted track. This looked less like valuable property and more like a geographic mistake. The key fit the padlock perfectly. As I drove my rented 4x4 onto the claim, the landscape was exactly as Marcus had described. Unforgiving, beautiful, and utterly empty save for a single small wooden shed. Before I could reach the shed, the sound of heavy engines announced an arrival. A massive black Hummer and a sleek, silver sedan pulled up, blocking my exit. 4 men emerged. The one in front, tall, prematurely gray, with the cold, authoritative eyes of a predator, was instantly recognizable from corporate profiles. Julian Sterling. "Mrs. Thorne," Sterling's voice cut the cold air. "I'm Julian Sterling. We were hoping to speak with you before you decided to make this long, costly trip. I am here, Mr. Sterling. And this is my property. We believe that's open to dispute. Our geological surveys indicate that this entire parcel of land is in fact worthless rock and a poor investment. However, due to an ancient surveying error, we hold claim to the land directly bordering yours. We'd like to offer you a modest, tax-deductible sum to sign over the deed immediately. Worthless, yet you rushed here from Vancouver to offer me cash? How generous. I ignored him and strode toward the shed. Don't be naive, Mrs. Thorne. Your late husband was a brilliant cartographer, but he was also known to be eccentric. He made a terrible investment. We are simply providing a dignified exit. Ignoring the increasing urgency in his voice, I inserted the ship's wheel key into the shed's padlock. The lock clicked open. I stepped inside the small, cold building. There, beneath a rickety workbench, was a seamless steel chest. Using the password Marcus had left, 10121995 Lyra, I opened the box. Inside, resting on a velvet lining, was a rugged tablet and a data stick labeled The Truth. I clicked the tablet on and found a single video file. Marcus's face filled the screen. He looked thin, but his eyes were sharp. Hello, my stargazer. If you're watching this, you're standing on the claim and the vultures have already arrived. I hope they brought a shovel, because they're about to bury themselves. He smiled, that quiet, crooked smile that was still so painful to see. 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with primary osseous dysplasia, a rare condition that attacks the bone marrow. The clock was short. I chose not to tell you or Naomi. I didn't want your last memory of me to be a slow decline. I wanted you to remember the explorer you married. Tears streamed down my face. Marcus had hidden his illness, but not out of deception, out of pure protective love. When I received the diagnosis, I decided to use the time I had left to secure your future. Forever. I didn't want to leave you wealth you'd have to fight for. I wanted to leave you leverage no one could touch. The knocking on the shed door grew insistent. Mrs. Thorne, we know you're accessing documents. This is interference in a potential legal proceeding. Marcus continued, his voice hardening slightly. The Sterlings want this land for the Borealis mine next door. They believe the osmium vein thereafter ends at my boundary. They're wrong. That vein is fractured, and the richest, deepest deposit of osmium-187, worth billions, is located not under the mine, but right beneath the worthless rock of my 3-acre plot. No one else knows. I manipulated the original survey data and covered the seismic readings. I made this land invisible. My eyes darted to the data stick. The truth. My final project wasn't cartography. It was accountability. On that data stick is every financial crime, every boundary fraud, every bribed official the Sterling Group used to get their Borealis mine running. Enough evidence to collapse the entire corporation and send Julian Sterling to prison for the rest of his life. He'll come after this land with everything he has, but he won't expect you to have the weapon I left behind. The video ended. I took a deep, steadying breath, closed the box, and stepped out to face the predator. I don't think you understand the gravity of your situation, Mrs. Thorne, Julian Sterling said the next morning as he stood in the freezing wind. He had returned with his lawyer, 2 security guards, and a certified copy of his boundary dispute claim. On the contrary, Mr. Sterling, I replied, standing beside my jeep, I understand the gravity perfectly. It's measured in trillions. Behind me, another vehicle pulled up. It was my daughter, Naomi. Her body language was open, but her eyes held a new steely resolve that mirrored her father's. She had seen the video, and I had given her the data stick. Mom, Naomi said, ignoring Sterling completely. I just ran a preliminary check on the data stick's contents. The fraud documentation goes back 30 years. And the osmium assay report is even better than Dad thought. They are sitting on a time bomb. Julian Sterling's face turned white. He hadn't expected the daughter, who was currently studying environmental law, to be involved. He definitely hadn't expected the word osmium to be uttered. Your husband's files are fabrications, Sterling stammered. A desperate attempt to extort. We will sue you for slander. You're welcome to try, I said, pulling out my own phone. But before you spend more on legal fees, listen to this message I left for your primary competitor, Omniterra Resources, last night. I hit the speaker button. The Thorne claim holds a verified high-concentration deposit of osmium-187, far exceeding any known North American reserve. I also possess irrefutable evidence of the Sterling Group's deep-seated corporate fraud and boundary manipulation, which I'm prepared to release to the Yukon authorities if they refuse my offer. I require a partner for sustainable extraction, full environmental remediation, and a minimum 20% equity split for my daughter. Call me back, Mr. Hayes. I lowered the phone. Mr. Hayes, the CEO of Omniterra, has been trying to get a foothold in this region for years, Julian. He's very interested in both my osmium and my data stick. Do you know what happens to the Sterling Group when its fraudulent history is exposed by its competitor? At the same time, I prove they've been mining on stolen land. Sterling looked at his attorney, whose face was grim. You have a choice, Julian. You can walk away, drop your baseless claim immediately, and these files remain private. You'll lose the osmium, but you'll keep your corporation, albeit diminished. Or you can fight and I release the complete archive to the authorities and you lose everything. And I mean everything. The silence was absolute, broken only by the cold Yukon wind. Sterling stared at Naomi, then at me, then finally at the ground. We will withdraw the claim, he conceded, his voice barely a rasp. As Sterling and his defeated entourage retreated, their Hummer disappearing down the track, I felt an extraordinary surge of emotion. Not just victory, but a powerful sense of continuation. Marcus hadn't just secured our future. He had armed me. Dad always said you had a better strategic mind than anyone in his mapping division, Mom, Naomi said, slipping her hand into mine. He said if you were motivated enough, you could outmaneuver any political tyrant or corporate criminal. The Forbidden Farm had become our fortress. Marcus, the quiet cartographer, had left behind a legacy built not on the maps of the past, but on the coordinates of our future. We were now the guardians of a priceless treasure, and the architects of a new ethical direction for this ancient land. I smiled, looking out at the vast, snow-covered, osmium-rich acres. I think it's time to call Mr. Hayes back. And then I need to know what Marcus left for me in tomorrow's video. Thorne and her deceased husband Marcus, who leaves her a secret Yukon property containing a massive osmium deposit and leverage against the antagonist, the Sterling Group. The next morning, the small cold shed felt like a command center. Elara and Naomi had secured a satellite link and were huddled over the tablet, which contained the geological surveys and the damning Sterling Group files. Outside, the Yukon air was crisp and unforgiving, but inside, a new sense of purpose burned, keeping the chill at bay. Mr. Hayes is ready for the video call, Naomi announced, clicking the laptop. Her demeanor had transformed. The fragile grief of the past weeks had been replaced by the focused energy of a strategist. Elara adjusted her jacket. Remember, Naomi, the osmium is the leverage, not the goal. Marcus wanted stewardship, not just profit. We stick to the Osmium-187 Trust for environmental remediation and your 20% equity share. We're not selling the land, we're leasing access under our terms. Mr. Hayes, the CEO of Omniterra, appeared on the screen, a weary ethical man in his late 50s. The negotiation was tense, focusing less on if they would proceed and more on how. Hayes was prepared to pay handsomely for the osmium, but Elara held firm on the environmental clauses, the pace of extraction, and the unprecedented equity split. Mrs. Thorne, Hayes said, running a hand through his thinning hair. This agreement is unorthodox. You're essentially retaining partnership rights over an asset you're leasing. Precisely, Elara countered, channeling the calm authority Marcus had possessed. This land is my legacy. The cost of admission to this partnership includes adherence to the highest standards of accountability. I will not have my husband's final act result in a toxic wasteland. After 3 grueling hours, Hayes conceded. Recognizing the immense value of the deposit and the ironclad nature of Elara's documentation against Sterling, they had won a sustainable generational deal, securing not only wealth but also the ethical future of the claim. "We did it, Mom," Naomi whispered, tears welling up, but this time they were tears of triumph. "He did it," Elara corrected, leaning back. "We just executed the plan." Later that evening, after the satellite dish was packed away and the cold had deepened, Elara finally opened the next video. Marcus appeared, seated in a dimly lit, book-lined study, likely a room Elara had never seen, reserved for his deepest secrets. "Hello, my stargazer," he began, his voice softer, devoid of the previous day's intensity. "If you've watched this one, the wolves have retreated, and the ethical men have signed the papers. You are financially secure, and that was the primary goal. But I didn't buy the boundary claim for the osmium." Elara leaned closer, her archaeologist's instincts suddenly tingling. "For years ago, while mapping the magnetic anomalies caused by the deep osmium deposit, I found a second anomaly, a non-geological one. A signature that suggested concentrated bone, tools, and worked material impossibly old deep under that shed. I bought the boundary not for metal but for history." Marcus paused, picking up a small, weathered stone from his desk. "Remember that paper you wrote on the pre-Dorset migration patterns? You argued for a lost nexus, a cultural waypoint that defied known coastal routes. Elara, I think it's here. The magnetic signature suggests a deep, undisturbed cultural layer. I was here to map it, to preserve it, to give you the chance to write the history you always dreamed of." He instructed her to look beneath the bench where the steel box had been resting. Following Marcus's instruction, Elara pushed aside the wooden bench. It revealed not a dirt floor, but a removable, cleverly disguised granite slab. With Naomi's help, they lifted it, exposing a narrow, excavated shaft. A small sealed glass jar rested on the first shelf of the shaft. Inside, nestled in cotton wool, was an object that made Elara gasp. A perfectly preserved, intricately carved bone needle, unmistakably Paleo-Eskimo in origin, but featuring motifs Elara had never seen in any textbook. It was beautiful, haunting, and impossibly fragile. "Mom, is that real?" Naomi whispered, her law text suddenly seeming trivial. "It's not just real, Naomi. It's impossible. This style, this location, it changes everything we know about early North American settlement." Her hands trembled as she realized the true final gift. Marcus had given her the opportunity for a world-changing archaeological discovery. Elara turned the bone needle over in the jar, a familiar passion reigniting in her chest. This was the inheritance for her soul. Marcus's voice resumed from the tablet, sounding grave. "I only excavated that single layer. The rest is untouched." But Julian Sterling's geologist, a man named Dr. Silas Gray, was the only other person to notice the magnetic anomaly. Gray dismissed it as thermal interference, but I don't believe him. He may still suspect something is hidden there. "Watch the perimeter," Marcus warned. Sterling's initial interest was the osmium, but if Gray told him about the anomaly, he may have planted a surveillance asset on the surrounding peaks. They won't be looking for mining equipment now. They'll be looking for signs of digging. You need to keep the real treasure a secret, Elara. The world, and certainly the Sterling Group, isn't ready for what lies beneath the boundary claim. Elara looked up, the small shed suddenly feeling less secure. She had focused entirely on the corporate battle, but Marcus had been fighting a two-front war. One for her financial safety, and one for the preservation of an invaluable, ancient secret. "Naomi," Elara said, her voice steady now with renewed purpose. "We have the money and we have the legal protection. Now we protect the Nexus. You handle the logistics and watch the high ground. I'm going to map this shaft. Your father didn't just leave us a claim. He left us a responsibility. The battle for the land was over. The battle for history had just begun." Elara was finally back in her element, the cartographer's widow becoming the archaeologist on the verge of the discovery of a lifetime, guided by the love of the man who knew her better than she knew herself. The discovery of the bone needle and Marcus's final, profound mission shifted Elara's focus entirely. The osmium deal, with its millions, suddenly felt like a necessary shield to protect the billions of years of history hidden beneath their feet. Silas Gray, Elara muttered, pacing the shed. Marcus mentioned him once, an arrogant geologist who thought he knew better than the bedrock itself. If he suspected the anomaly was cultural, he'd report it, not for the Sterling Group, but for the scientific notoriety. He needs eyes on the property, Naomi stated, tapping the satellite tablet. Dad's security systems had to be subtle. If Gray's watching, he's using high-powered thermal or optical sensors from a vantage point. Naomi, drawing on her technical and legal background, quickly got to work. Using a hidden compartment in the shed's ceiling, another of Marcus's secrets, she retrieved a sleek, collapsible drone equipped with electromagnetic and thermal scanning capabilities. The highest point overlooking the claim is Talon Peak, Naomi calculated, comparing Marcus's topographical maps with the real-time satellite feed. It offers a perfect, stable line of sight. If there's surveillance, it's there. Under the glare of the Yukon sun, Naomi piloted the drone. It took 30 agonizing minutes, but the drone's thermal sensors finally detected a distinct heat signature on a rocky outcrop of Talon Peak. A solar-powered, military-grade long-range camera, perfectly camouflaged. Found it, Naomi declared, the image sharp on the tablet. It's running a minimal thermal signature, designed for long-term monitoring, not real-time stream. It captures an image every 15 minutes. They're looking for patterns of activity, heavy equipment, or signs of excavation. Then we give them a pattern that confirms their initial assessment. Nothing but a cold, desolate claim, Elara said, her eyes gleaming with tactical purpose. Naomi, use the drone to deploy the jamming frequency Marcus left in the emergency gear. We need to blind it for 24 hours. And then we introduce a new lie to their historical log. They spent the rest of the day staging a performance. Using Marcus's old prospecting gear, a rusty pickaxe and a handful of harmless rock samples, Elara spent an hour digging conspicuously on the far, worthless edge of the property, planting the samples and then moving them into the shed. The next morning, they allowed the camera to resume operation, transmitting images of the worthless section, reinforcing the idea that Elara was simply an amateur prospector fooled by her late husband's folly. With the external threat temporarily managed, Elara turned her attention to the small, cold shaft beneath the shed. She carefully lowered herself, using a low-power headlamp to illuminate the walls. The air was stale still. This was an archaeological vacuum, untouched for millennia. The shaft opened into a tiny, dry antechamber, a perfect natural shelter that Marcus had reinforced with concrete and steel beams. The Paleo-Eskimo needle was not alone. As Elara scanned the back wall, she saw it. A circular pattern carved into a flat slab of shale. It wasn't just decoration. It was a complex celestial map. Naomi, get down here. You need to see this. Naomi slid down the shaft. Her lamp joined Elara's, illuminating the carving. It depicted stars that aligned with the current northern sky, but one prominent constellation, Lyra, Marcus's favorite, was missing. In its place was a series of radiating lines pointing downward. It's a map, Elara whispered, running a gloved finger over the stone. A star map, but it's incomplete. They didn't chart the sky. They charted what was beneath it. And Lyra isn't missing. It's the cipher. Look at these lines. The radiating lines from the Lyra symbol converged on one specific point on the chamber floor, marked by a small, perfectly round indentation. If this is a celestial map showing a terrestrial location, Naomi observed, kneeling, then the indentation must mark the actual nexus, the central cache of the site. Naomi pulled out a small laser measure. The surface reading shows bedrock. Dad covered this too. Elara looked around the small chamber, realizing the full scope of Marcus's brilliance. He hadn't bought the claim for its future value. He had bought it to preserve a piece of the world's past, and he left the final, crucial step to his archaeologist wife. Marcus knew I couldn't get a full excavation crew up here without the world knowing. He secured the financing with the osmium deal so we could do the preliminary work ourselves slowly, ethically, and in secret. Just as Elara placed a hand on the rock, considering how to breach the floor, the drone tablet, resting on the shed floor above them, flashed a violent red alarm. Naomi scrambled up the shaft, pulling Elara after her. She grabbed the tablet. "Mom," the jammer failed. Or they overwhelmed the frequency. The camera on Talon Peak is back online, and it's sending a live stream. Worse, the screen displayed a new chilling image. A sleek black helicopter descending toward the far edge of the claim. "It's the Sterling Group's corporate chopper," Naomi said, her voice shaking. "They saw the staged prospecting and they didn't buy it. They're landing. And look who is the first one out." Stepping onto the snow was Julian Sterling, accompanied by two massive security personnel and a nervous, thin man in a heavy parka, Dr. Silas Gray. Sterling was holding a satellite phone, his expression cold and furious. He had lost the legal battle, but he clearly hadn't lost his determination. He was coming to seize the asset he believed Marcus had stolen, the osmium. He had no idea he was walking onto the most significant archaeological site in North America. "They're here for the rock samples," Elara stated, grabbing the steel box with the data stick. "They want proof of the osmium vein, so they can restart the boundary dispute on grounds of fraudulent concealment." "They're 20 minutes away by foot, Mom," Naomi said, already locking the shed door and throwing fresh snow over their tracks. "The chopper is too loud for them to hear us. We have to hide the physical evidence." Elara looked from the hidden shaft in the floor to the encroaching figures. They had secured the future, but they hadn't secured the present. Marcus had anticipated the corporate attack, but had he left a final physical defense against a direct incursion? "Your father was a paranoid man, Naomi," Elara said, a strategic fire burning in her eyes. "Let's see what else he hid in this shed." Thank you very much for watching. Share with those who also like stories. Subscribe and tell me in the comments if you liked my story. Cheers!